Hey everyone, welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. Dr. Bill Heward was gracious enough to return to the show for what is session 260. In this episode, we talked about a handful of different topics, including how to respond to criticisms of reinforcement practices, of the Alfie Kohns of the world, if you will, the international dissemination of the excellent book, Let's Make a Contract, which he co-authored with Dr. Jill Dardig, and we spent the majority of the time discussing Bill's extensive knowledge and body of work in the area of whole group responding practices in classroom settings. Specifically, we talked about how he first learned about this practice, why he wanted to pursue it as a line of research, how he and his colleagues carried out one of the better known studies on this topic, and that's the Lambert et al. Study from 2006, and lots more. Along the way, Bill offered great advice for practitioners who are interested in trying out these low-tech, high-impact strategies. And during the conversation, Bill was nice enough to mention a talk that I gave at the 2023 BABAT conference. And in that talk, I referenced some of his work, both the Lambert et al. Study as well as some of his work in the area of behavioral contracts. At the time of the interview with Bill, the course wasn't available yet. However, I'm happy to report that it is out now. The course is called When Not to FBA, 5 Quick Strategies for Improving Behavior in the Classroom. So if you're working in school settings and you're supporting teachers in classrooms, please consider checking this out. You can go to thebehavioraltoolbox.com/courses and look for it there. We put a lot of work into this, and one of the things we really were intentional in doing is basically removing all the behavior analytic jargon. Even though the course is very much anchored to the literature, we feel that it's accessible to just about anyone who's interested in improving behavior in classroom settings. So if you work with school psychologists, special educators, administrative staff, etc., please share this with them as well, because I think they'll get a lot out of it too. All right, back to the interview. One of the things that makes Bill such an awesome podcast guest is that he comes to the table with lots of resources. In fact, he sent me a Google Drive folder chock full of articles, studies, and many other resources. So instead of listing each one out individually, like I usually do in the show notes, I just put a link to the Google folder right in the show notes themselves and just figured I'd cut out the middleman. So you can go to the show notes for this episode to check that out. You can also go to behavioralobservations.com and sign up for the email list so you'll get these show notes sent right to your email inbox. It's pretty straightforward. Just wait for the pop-up, fill out your name and email address. It's 100% non-spammy and very straightforward, so you can go check it out there. While we're also on the topic of Bill's generosity, he wanted me to remind you that the website contractingwithkids.com has several free downloadable contract templates. So I put a link to that in the show notes as well. This podcast is brought to you by HRIC Recruiting. Barb Voss has been placing BCBAs in positions throughout the United States for over a decade now, and she's been a recruiter for over 30 years. She really knows the ABA job landscape like no one else. And when you work with HRIC, you work directly with her. It's a highly personalized experience. So if you're about to graduate, or if you're looking for a change of pace, if you just want to know if the grass really is greener on the other side, go to hricolorado.com to schedule a confidential chat right away. And in addition to the Behavioral Toolbox trainings, we're also brought to you by ACE-approved CEUs from Behavioral Observations. Yes, yours truly. Well, me and the guests, and mainly the guests, that is. That's right. Go to behavioralobservations.com/get CEUs, and you can learn while you're driving, walking the dog, doing the dishes, or whatever else you're doing, all from some of your favorite podcast guests. We've got almost 50 topics or 50 events across a range of topics, so go check it out there. All right, I think that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get to this fun conversation with Dr. Bill Heward.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now, here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
Dr. Bill Heward, welcome back to the Behavioral Observations Podcast. It's good to see you again.
It's great to see you, Matt. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, last time we got to hang out, we got to spend quite a bit of time together at BABAT. That was my first BABAT conference, and it did not disappoint. What a fun time it was to see all sorts of great talks and get to, again, spend some quality time with folks like you and many other folks in our respective circles.
I got to say, Matt, now that you mentioned BABAT, I need to say something about it, and it's going to come across. I'm really sucking up to the host here, but Jill and I attended your presentation where you were offering for behavior analysts working in schools a series of more. You don't jump in and say, "Well, I got student's having a problem. Well, let's do a functional analysis and build a bit." But take a look at what's going on in the classroom, and here's a number of things you can do to not only help that child, that student, but the teacher get the kids going. So you talked about some group responding things, choral responding, response cards, good behavior game, and you kind of gradually ramped it up to the point. And then you said, well, sometimes we do need to be a little more intensive and individually focused. But I just love that, because and I think some of what we'll be talking about here too is related to, not just directly for teachers, but for behavior analysts working in schools, how we might be generally more useful.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for the kind words about that presentation. That was a lot of fun to put together. And it was driven in many respects by the work that you've done and with your colleagues as well. So on the one hand, I was very glad to see you and Jill in the audience in attendance. On the other hand, it was a little nerve wracking because I was actually presenting some data that you published. I was like, oh, I hope I'm getting this right. So, and we'll get into those very data actually in a few minutes.
Okay.
So this is all, quite timely. And, if I might put another shameless plug in, is that actually based off of that talk, I'm actually creating an asynchronous video course on that topic with my friends Polly Gavoni and Anika Costa over at thebehavioraltoolbox.com. So it's so close to being done. I can't wait to share with folks. So stay tuned for that. But back to our conversation here. So we're going to get into whole group responding and how you got into that work and maybe what you learned about doing the research in that area. Before we do that, though, I know you and Jill have been running around the world talking about let's make a contract. And I think that this is just such a cool dissemination story. I know, and I'll link to the original podcast the three of us did, so people can get like the full story if they want to. But the Cliff Notes version is for the audience is that Bill here and his wife, Jill, Dr. Jill Dardig, wrote this really lovely book. And it's been translated into how many languages so far? As
of now, English and 12 others. Mm-hmm. It's really exciting to see what's happening. And it's in press now in Saudi Arabia. It's going to come out soon in Pan-Arabic, translated in a way that would be acceptable, readable across 23 countries in which Arabic is the primary language. It's coming out April 19th in Polish. It's in press, ready to go to the printer in Slovak. Jill and I just last month signed a translation agreement license with a major publisher in Beijing. They had just recently this year, launched the third edition of Cooper and Friends. So the applied behavior analysis text is out in Chinese. And they said, we're interested in the contracting book. And we said, we'd love that. So that's in the works. Icelandic. We're about to get an Icelandic translation going. So it's a thrill to see what's happening with it.
Did you ever imagine back in the day at UMass or in Central or whatever that this would be happening? I don't know. It's gotta be kind of like pinch me type of moment.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, cool. So I will make sure people can find those materials if they want to. They can go to behavioralobservations.com, look for the show notes for this episode, and they'll have links to that podcast episode, your website, etc. there. So I keep promising this and putting it off, but we will get to whole group responding in just a second. But I couldn't help but noticing that one of the things when you come on the show, you're really good at sending me a lot of materials in advance, which is like gold. It's so helpful for a podcast host to have that material with which to generate questions. One of the things that caught my eye was an article the article, in the article itself, you referenced Alfie Kohn's quote unquote misguided advice in using rewards.
Yeah.
Now, Alfie Kohn, for those who don't know, wrote a book called Punished by Rewards. He's basically he's very anti-behavior analytic in his outlook, and is not shy about making statements and things like that. So I've got a question for you, but I want to preface it with a quick story.
Sure.
I think I might have told this years ago on the show, but anyway, I remember I was consulting to a school in rural Vermont, way up in the Northeast Kingdom, and there was a principal. I walked into his office. I said, "Hey, Bob," or what, I can't even remember what his name is Carl, I think. But anyway, he's like, "Hey, Matt, check this out." And before he even finished the sentence, a book is flying across the room. And I just, I managed to, catch, I'm not, I am not athletically gifted. I did manage to catch it though. And I picked, as I fumbled and turned it right side up and front ways and whatnot, I turned it over, and it's like Punished by Rewards by Alfie Kohn. And I just looked at him. I said, "Nope." And I tossed it right back. and guess what, Bill? I did not get the contract to consult with that school the following year. This is 20 years ago. Not my most celebrated moment in terms of soft skills and whatnot. But so I'm wondering, so I think there's going to be broad agreement in the audience about some of the things that folks like Alfie Kohn and others say about behavior analysis. And I'm not, criticisms of behavior analysis. I'm not talking about the criticisms in terms of the treatment of autism that we're seeing right now. I'm talking about the kind of, what perhaps the more old school version of ABA criticisms in public schools, people who question the use of things like tokens and rewards and things along those lines.
Yeah.
So I guess my long wind up to the question here, Bill, based on my, inept handling of that interaction is, what is some advice to someone who encounters the Punished by Rewards argument that you would give to someone to counter that in a way that's perhaps a little bit more, collegial, a little bit more effective than, the stupidity with which I handled that situation?
Well, collectively, how effective we, the, ABA behavior analysts, the special ed community that is interested in trying to make teaching and learning for kids, especially those with, special needs, but for all kids be more effective. We still have an awful long way to go. So Kohn's article, Mr. Kohn may come up again, some of our discussion down the road, because he's been at best, he's not helped. His stuff is still widely read in teacher education programs. So he published an article. It was called Hooked on Praise in Parents Magazine in May of 2000. And that's goes out. And then it was republished, a little bit different title, in Young Children in September of 2001. And Young Children's one of the maybe flagship journals for, child care, early childhood stuff. Okay. And in it, he said, well, you don't want to be saying good job to kids. He claimed 5 things. It manipulates children, creates praise junkies, steals a child's pleasure from learning, will cause a child to lose interest, and reduces achievement. Okay. Here's one thing that I would do to suggest for teachers, certainly, and anybody trying to work with teachers or parents concerned about this. In 2001, Phil Strain and Gail Joseph published a paper in the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. The title is A Not So Good Job with Good Job. And they just, they went to each of these 5 things and, really debunked them, but in great, just plain language with examples. And if it's all right, here's their conclusion. I'm just going to quote from Strain and Joseph. At first blush, Kohn's treatise on good job may hold some liberal appeal. However, promoting non-validated strategies and thereby potentially precluding children from reaching the optimum development only serves to continue the status quo. In our opinion, children ought to have many rights in the education process, first of which is the right to receive those effective teaching strategies best suited for their individual needs. And then they end with this. Contrary to Cohn's rhetoric, the planned use of positive reinforcement is antithetical to blurted out judgments, slathered on praise, knee-jerk tendencies, and evaluative eruptions. Cohn's use of excessive language once again reveals his apparent disdain for individuals who would use positive approach. Cohn's transparent language serves only to construct a fictitious straw man that Cohn conveniently burns in effigy. It is a pedantic tactic more aligned with high school debate than with reflective practice, critical inquiry, and the advancement of meaningful discourse about facilitating children's development. They kind of threw the book too, but now, and there's been more stuff on. Oh, another thing to look at is the powerful statement in Todd Risley's memorial article in JABA about Montrose Wolf. And he just, I'll send you that quote too. It's just powerful. He just essentially says we've never seen such an amazing effect as, parent and teacher positive attention kids, and talk about catching them being good. And Risley went on to say it could arguably be called the most prominent discovery in American psychology. And it's kind of the standard of recognition too. One more, if I.
Yeah, no, this is good stuff. I like it.
So at OSU, we kind of hosted and organized 3 conferences. We called them Focus on Behavior Analysis in Education. And then the final one was 2002. And one of our invited speakers was Judy Cameron, University of Alberta. And her presentation was the rewards and intrinsic motivation controversy. And in the book of collected some chapters based on papers at that conference, I'll see if I could find that for you. So she just, she does a serious review of the research at that time. And just debunks it. And in terms of kind of the flawed questions being asked, a yes, no, you can set an experiment up, and certainly in certain ways to obtain results, and just all the social validity about, kids just beaming and growing and developing. And now there's the whole thing of how do we best as anybody, parent, teacher, partner, use praise most effectively. That's what we all can. I know I can be better at it. But,
for sure,
man, that's if you could only do 2 things, teaching. Well, okay, 3. Have a goal, have a measurable objective. What am I trying to get out of this lesson? Whether it's one-on-one, helping your child learn a more adaptive replacement behavior, let's say for a problem, challenging behavior, or it's a group of students, some academic thing. Have a goal. Have a way to determine, are they doing any better with it? Can I objectively observe and measure? Have them make meaningful responses to that goal. Give them feedback and include a bunch of positive experience. You don't have them make responses at a level they'll be successful with.
Are you looking for a new job, but you're overwhelmed with all the emails that you're getting from various ABA agencies? What if there was someone who was in your corner and could help you find the perfect job placement? Well, that person exists. Barbara Voss has been working as a recruiter for over 30 years, and her company, HRIC, specializes in placing BCBAs in permanent full-time positions throughout the United States. Barbara has been placing BCBAs since 2011, so she knows our business, and she offers personalized service to any BCBA looking for a new position. She also helps companies looking to hire BCBAs too. Here are just some of the things Barbara can help you with. She can provide information about salary ranges in different markets across the country. She can help you write your resume. She can coordinate and prepare you for the interview process, and even help negotiate the right salary for you. And best of all, there are no charges to any candidate for all of these services. When you're ready to make a change and want to work with someone who will listen to you and understand what you need in a new position, contact Barbara at HRIC. To schedule a confidential discussion, head over to hricolorado.com. Again, that's hricolorado.com, and hit the contact button to connect with Barbara. You won't be disappointed. So, as promised, we're going to get into active student responding, whole group responding. I suppose maybe we could take a moment to just talk about what set the table as it's, in terms of what are the actual terms. What do you choose to call this whole umbrella strategy, if you will? And then we'll get into what it is and stuff like that. Do you prefer whole group responding, active student responding, or I guess those are, those could be separated into different categories. I suppose you could have an active duty, active response that is delivered by an individual. So maybe from the whole group responding standpoint, what would you, for those who are just tuned in and have no idea what we're talking about, what is a whole group response?
Well, and a group is two or more, right? So 2 or more learners, and typically responding simultaneously to a series of questions, items, problems presented, not necessarily by the teacher. There's some fun and neat things we could do where students present the items as well. But everybody responds instead of the most teachers know student engagement's important. You could ask 100,000 teachers, well, should students be engaged? And well, of course. But how do you do it? So it's really an engineering. It's a bit of a challenge. And so the most common way to have students engaged or in instruction, this has been found, internationally, is, well, first we talk too much, like I'm doing now. Teachers, teaching is telling and talking, but then teacher will pose a question or a problem or who can tell me. And it's one student at a time recitation, either, raise your hand to volunteer or the teacher calls on somebody. And we'd like to think that the other students are getting something out of that. And surely a few maybe are, talking to themselves, speaker, listener. I hear the question. This is what I would say. Yeah, Johnny across. Yeah, he said that. I got it right. And well, when we look at the results of, before and after lessons like that, what students get from it, it suggests that probably not, most students aren't. And the other thing that happens so often is, for a couple of reasons, when teachers call in somebody who wants to answer this, high achieving students tend to respond. High achieving students tend to get called on. Why? I'm doing well. They got it. That's reinforcing for me as a teacher. And students who don't quite have it are happy to, too often able to just sit there. So strategies like what I refer to as the kind of low tech, no batteries required, no fancy equipment, a couple that you can do literally right away. Choral responding. So the group responds vocally. That can be adapted if needed to be. There are other ways, but to a relatively fast-paced, and there's reasons for that, series of questions, items, problems. And then there's a lot of, so you can get it up and running. You can kind of be successful, but like anything, to become really skilled at it, it takes a bit, and there are some techniques. And for example, we mix in calling on individual students from time to time. You can do all kinds of fun group contingencies. You can incorporate. It's pretty neat. So what's been found with say choral responding, just looking at that curriculum content, it's been used and shown any content in which verbal knowledge is relevant. It's been used from learners with preschool to grad school, typical students with disabilities, classroom, gym, boardroom, band room. You could use it to review yesterday's lesson. We can intersperse a little bouts of just a minute or two of choral responding in a lesson where the teacher's demonstrating, lecturing. You can recap today's lessons. And then what's pretty neat is the impact. Choral responding research has shown it yields pretty significant increases, not only in active student responding, but the effect there, it can produce measurable learning outcomes in a single lesson. I think I've uploaded a few of the studies or reviews that would attest to that.
So Bill, out of curiosity, so when did whole group responding first come onto your radar? How did you discover it? What did you learn it as you were a graduate student, or was it just something that you and your colleagues kind of developed, or did you see it somewhere else? What was the source of this technique? And yeah, let's start with that. I got other questions, but let's start with that.
Yeah, I love to. I don't know. See, back there's like baseball stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm 10 years old, and I'm in this little town in Michigan, right around the bottom from Chicago there, and watching WGN and Ernie Banks, and I'm gonna pitch. I'm gonna play for the Chicago Cubs. So I was just all into baseball, and went to baseball camps and did it. So I was, and really found that not just a lot of practice, but focused, intensive practice, made a real difference. So I just had a personal relationship, I guess, to it's important to actually do stuff, and then at Western Michigan as an undergraduate in the psychology department, which of course was the learning about Skinner's behaviorism department, I got exposed to both as a student, how Dick Malott, Jack Michael, Don Whaley, how they organized their classes. And you had study objectives every day. You came, you did a little quiz the next. You broke stuff down. You made a lot of responses. And so that's in the background. And then you're reading related things. But what happened that really was interesting, and I guess brought it to the forefront for me. As a doc student at UMass Amherst, and that's where Jill and I met. This is 71, 74, a couple of years ago. My graduate assistantship was to be a research assistant on, then it was called the Northeast Regional Media Center for the Deaf. And it was one of four. Then it was BEH. This was Lyndon Baines Johnson Great Society. There was tremendous amount of federal and public money to try to turn things around educationally and many other aspects of our society then. And so this project, it served all New England and New York, Pennsylvania, kind of the Northeast part of. There were three others around the country, and each one focused on some aspect of technical assistance and research to support and improve education for deaf and hearing impaired students. The guy who ran it, his name was Ray Wyman, and Ray was the world's literally international expert on the overhead projector. And Ray, he'd be traveling, giving lectures about the machine and how. And well, I'm still a lover of the overhead projector. So what Dr. Wyman came up with, and he called it the MERV. It sounded like a ballistic rocket or something. He's saying, well, if the teacher could have an overhead projector, what if you put 3 or 4 deaf students in a little horseshoe and gave them an overhead projector, gave each of them an overhead projector, and they could make responses visually, and the teacher would have instant, kind of simultaneous instant access to all of those responses. So I got assigned, that was my thing. I said, yeah, well, maybe visual response system, we could call it that. And they said, yeah, that's good. And I ended up being assigned to help develop those classrooms. My dissertation was done at the Boston School for the Deaf. And then later, when I came to OSU, I got a couple of grants, a BEH, Bureau of Education Handicap, OSEP now, and a state youth commission grant in Ohio to support constructing a couple of these, about a half dozen in and around central Ohio. And so imagine now 8 to 10 in a horseshoe, students with a overhead projector built into the desk, and behind them is a screen and the teacher's in the middle with a little control. I'll send you a picture of this and stuff with it. And the students make responses by writing, drawing, opposing, placing, organizing. We actually discovered there's well over 30 different kind of topographies of responding that a student can do on an overhead projector. And it was set up where, we had switches that teachers could turn the lights on, give them points. It's a heck of a lot of fun. But so anyway, but for the experience in being involved with evaluating that system and seeing it at work and help teachers learn to use it who are working with deaf kids. When I got to OSU, say, hey, why not? I wonder if we could just try some of these in typical classrooms and kids. And so that's where those grants from. We did that. And that really set the stage for response cards that, well, certainly you're not going to build this, then it cost 30, 40,000 then to build one of these rooms. It'd be a ton of money now, much, much more. Of course, the equipment being more sophisticated, I don't believe it'd be any more behaviorally functional, instructionally functional. But why? So one of the things the kids did, we created a bunch of, you'd call them response cards. Now I do. You remember, I don't know, you're old enough to remember 35 millimeter slides in the carousel, of course. Well, there's a bigger size that kind of the pros use. And so it's maybe twice the size. And there's these big plastic kind of frames. And we created a way to produce on clear transparency, numbers, letters, words, relationships, greater than, less than, whatever. And now in the visual response system, the students would slap those down. And so that kind of led to this idea of, geez, let's have everybody hold something up in a regular classroom and see how that's going. Choral responding's been around for a century or more. You'll still see it some in some preschools. Some language teachers, second and third language teachers will sometimes use it.
Oh yeah, I remember that in high school, learning the Spanish alphabet and stuff like that.
Yeah, but not nearly enough. You see it rarely, beyond that, and it's kind of a lost thing. So, behavior analysts and my colleagues and students and I have been looking at choral responding. We certainly didn't invent it, but I think the research that's been done and working with teachers has helped to identify, relevant, how to make it really effective, more effective.
All right. So I think the paper, at least that I'm most familiar with, is the Lambert et al. I believe it's 2006, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
And that was the one where you and your colleagues intervened in a couple of fourth grade classrooms, if I'm not mistaken. So far, you can just jump in and correct me if my summary is off the mark, but that's my recollection of that paper. And I actually, that I showed those data in that presentation of mine that you referenced earlier. So I want to get into the nuts and bolts of that study and kind of really go deep, because I think the data are so clear. And I think when you see data that are that clear, it certainly, there's a story there that's worth being told. But I want to back it up a couple of steps and just really talk about what was how did you guys become involved in that school? And I got a bunch of questions that kind of flood to mind, not only that, but were you looking to bench test this response card, or was that something that the situation said, I think I know what'll work, I sometimes wonder where people have a procedure in their mind, and then there's this procedure in search of a problem, or was this an organic solution or an organically identified solution based on an analysis of the setting? So again, for listeners, I'll put links to the article in the show notes, but it was a couple of fourth grade classrooms. Within those classrooms, there were a handful of kids that had significant disruptive classroom behavior. And then, Bill, I'll let you kind of pick it up from here. Sure.
Well, this is a project that my colleague Gwen Cartledge and our special education faculty. Gwen had, among our faculty, we had a number of projects with local schools during that time, and there still are today by faculty working now. But Gwen's project with the Columbus City Schools, she was in 3 or 4, inner city elementary schools where, and particularly focusing on trying to support African American kids and learners, of which the one school she was in also had a lot of turnover. It was less than a mile actually from campus. So we're there. It was an old building. It's gone now, but it was a tough environment for teachers and kids. And Michael Lambert was working for Gwen as a 20-hour a week, research and assistant on her project. And that school in particular was just a real challenge with, you'd be in the halls and, just talk about, a place where a good application of what we know about school-wide positive supports today would just, you'd want to go in and do that as a foundation and such. Mike Lambert had just completed a class with me where I was talking about increasing student engagement and effective strategies, and had shared a couple of previous studies on response cards. And he came in, he said, Gwen, let's see, how about Bill can be on my dissertation committee? So that's how I got involved to help design the study. And we took what we had learned from the previous work and just said, let's try it here. There's a bunch of data now, of course, much, much more now, decades later. But yet, even at that time, there was clear information that, just staying with response cards here, one, you're going to get a lot more engagement from students. You're going to get improved kind of learning measures, learning outcomes, whether it's pre-post lesson, whether it's weekly, use a variety of ways that's been done. But more anecdotally, some of the corresponding stuff, it showed this reduction in kind of off-task and disruptive behavior as well. So with Michael's dissertation, the emphasis was, let's measure 2 things primarily. And that's what was reported. There were also some academic data, but one is this a systematic replication of a lot more participation, responding? That's clear. But then target some kids to observe. And it was a momentary time sampling on a random schedule. So during these lessons, in each class, there were 4, they were all boys. 2 were in the process of being evaluated for emotional and behavior disturbance. The other 2 were consistently sent to the principals, to no avail and so forth. And so we identified individualized response classes because these guys are pretty skilled at having ways to disrupt the class or not participate and so forth. So observer would, we had the headphones in and look at the one targeted student and then yes or no, mark down, yes or no, go to the next one. So during the these were roughly just 20-minute lessons. Each student got observed 10 times. And the data are just striking. It's an ABAB reversal design. And when they had response card. Oh, so what's baseline? Baseline is, everything's the same except during baseline, teacher asks a question, this times this, or what would be the operation here, subtraction, or, oh,
no. Did you ever see Ferris Bueller's Day Off?
Yeah, isn't that something?
Yeah, with Ben Stein in the beginning.
There you go.
Like, that is my. Yeah. That's what I conjure in my mind's eye when people talk about single student responding, which was the baseline condition of Lambert et al. And so that's the funny thing is, I think most people can conjure up some sort of image or at least relate to some sort of experience they've had as a student where the teacher's just engaging in that single student responding. And to your earlier point, where the high achieving students are going to have their jump out of their seats to raise their hand, and there's going to be some aversives for those who may be on the cusp of emitting a correct response, but are unsure of themselves and may not want to may perceive getting an incorrect response as
well. And I'm a fourth grader now. I'm highly skilled at being disruptive, getting out of things I don't want to do. On top of that, sadly, I don't have the skills to be successful. I don't have much of a history of obtaining reinforcement for answering a question, or I'd be, did you pay attention? Do you want me to go over that again? And the results are just striking. And the only difference then during the two response card phases, that condition was everything's the same, but it was cards up. Everybody had just a blank laminated, piece of shower board and a marker, and they'd write and hold their cards up. And the amount of responding went up, way up. And disruptive behavior, there was nothing changed there. It was kind of business as usual. Teacher would still send somebody out of the room, or nothing changed at all. The kids were engaged. It's just something.
Yeah, and I'll post a picture of the graph. We keep referencing, the data. And I know this is an audio format for folks.
Sure.
So just if you don't, again, not to beat a dead horse here, go to behavioralobservations.com. We'll have the show notes there. I'll have a picture of it there for you. But suffice to say, the data are like flipping a light switch. And that's the thing that really drew me to this line of research and to some of the other interventions that you and I have just talked about, pretty much since we've met each other, I suppose.
Yeah.
And a lot of the other things that kind of drove the, certainly your work and a lot of things that inspired the talk that I gave at BABAT. And that these are light switch interventions where it's clear as day. There's not really a lot of, kind of change over time from one condition to the next. It's really quite remarkable. So when you said the instructions were given in a whole group context, and were these just like, what is, 8 times 9 or something like that? It would just be like, just simple.
I'd have to dig to really get the actual curricular, examples, but nothing was changed. Purposely, nothing was changed to, it'd be more effective if it was, I would suspect. You didn't want to go in and tell the teacher, well, you have to do everything differently.
Sure. So I do want to get into the rate of opportunities to respond as it relates to whole group responding, but I want to wrap up the Lambert paper first.
Okay.
So you had shared with me in conversation that I believe those data were so clear that graph or those graphs from that paper were used as an example of single case design. Am I remembering that correctly?
You are, and I'll have to dig out. There was a special issue of a journal where they used that article and gave it to maybe 4 or 5 different researchers who were developing, advocating for various ways to do statistical analyses of single case research. And it was just really, really interesting to see the results. Of course, didn't change anything. They were still as obvious as they were. But I guess what they wanted to do was, whoever organized that, I've got it somewhere. I'll send it to you to see if it's, useful from your perspective. But I guess they wanted for that purpose to see how these different ways to look at single case series data would be judged as to be meaningful differences or not, useful by these different tools.
Yeah.
And
so a couple other questions related to this project occurred to me, and one is what was the qualitative feedback that you got, that you guys were able to ascertain, whether systematically or just anecdotally, as it relates to how people responded to this intervention beyond the data? You know, I guess where I'm kind of backing into the social validity question here.
Yep.
You know, did people enjoy this? Was this something that you thought that the teachers would carry on in their practice absent of the project staff being there and, you know, kind of
now you're
prompting their use of it and stuff?
Yeah. The best social validity is to watch the kid and the students, and, you know, almost to a person. There's exceptions, of course, but when you do social validity interviews and questions in different ways and bring in people and kids, even high schoolers, who say, I'd rather be active than just sitting there and I don't have to raise my hand. I can. There have been a couple of situations where people have started to use some of these strategies, and the kids go to other teachers and say, why aren't you doing it? But for me to sit here and try to claim, and I won't, that any teachers who's used these and gotten some really positive results right away continues to use them, not necessarily. Yeah.
That's interesting.
And I've got my thoughts about that, but I'll see if that comes up later.
Yeah. No. So, because that. Well, we might as well share them now, because my next question related to that is, you know, was this something that people observed work and then said, you know, well, maybe the teacher next door sees this and is like, well, that looks like, you know, you're really, you know, doing great with this thing. And, you know, you come out of class, you know, happy instead of bedraggled or frustrated or what have you, you know, what is this magic that you're using there? And how can I get in on that? You know, so what are you said, you might have some speculation as to why that's not perhaps occurring.
Well, yes, I guess I think it's more in speculation. Been trying to do this
speculate away
quite a time with, you know, with hundreds of teachers and, you know, tons of success stories. And just one as an example, Fernando Armendariz, he grew up outside of Hermosillo, Mexico. Actually, he grew up at Los Rocones, the Skinner, the Walden 2 project. There's a guest for you. Fernando, you'd have a lot of fun with. He's got fabulous stories about Beach coming down, and they drove from Mexico in an old van up to L.A. when Skinner gave his final address to APA.
Okay,
and they walk in, and he says, "Yeah, you know, Fernando's quite the guy," but he did Fernando's master's thesis. This is ABA. I'll just pick a year. Maybe it's 1998. It's a while ago. And I'm scrolling through the program before, you know, going to ABA. Might have been before the I think it was. Looking at posters listed. What am I going to? I see one that's response cards. All right. And I go, and it's his master's thesis he did at the University of Arizona, in a general education classroom where there's a lot of challenging, kind of off-task, disruptive behavior. And it was published in, I think, maybe even the very first issue of the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions. And what he found of a powerful demonstration was he collapsed the data into a graphic display. I'm going to send you that too, Matt. That might be of interest. That showed over the course of the lesson, when it was single student responding, how quickly the majority of the students in that class were off task, you know, looking, walking around, talking. And so you see it pretty high at the start and just continue to go up. And then he contrasts that on the same display, another data path, and it's low to the beginning and stays low all the way throughout, because the kids are responding the whole time. That's pretty neat. So I think I'm getting away from, you know, your prompt or your question, but there's a boatload of data now across decades, learners from preschool to through high school, showing good effects. Teachers haven't heard of teachers. Teachers are expected to do so much today, and that came across in your BABAT presentation. And we've just anybody has to be, whether it's a school principal, a leadership team, a colleague, to come in and say, you need to do this, you should try this. Boy, it's tough what teachers are expected to do. So I just think whatever we're doing, we've got to start by going in saying, I'm not there to turn this teacher into a behavior analyst. I'm there to see if I can collaborate and support them to do what they really want to do, is help kids succeed and do more better. And if some ways I can do that, but I've got to start by respecting what teachers do. I've got to learn what are the contingencies, what's this teacher facing, and then go in, and this is with something simple that has a shot at making an immediate effect of some kind. I can remember one of those early focus conferences. Ron Van Houten was one of our presenters, and Ron was still at the university in New Brunswick, I believe he was. And it was he presented the first research he was doing. What do you call them? Performance feedback systems. You couldn't do it now. You'd have to figure out a way to do it, but where you would post kids' performance, typically on brief timings, things like math problems or reading or so forth. And it would be beat your own best score. You could have group continue, just all this stuff. And he talked about that being something that was easy to do. The kids liked it, so they were responding positively, and teachers could see, a benefit, and you're not asking them to, change everything about what they're doing. But so a few years ago, Jill and I, we had an opportunity to do I don't know, maybe it was a 2-day thing. I know I was tired of hearing myself. Let's hope I didn't put them through 2 days. But it was on some effective instruction things in Seoul, South Korea. And it was sponsored by a Ministry of Special Education. So they were special education teachers, consultants, supervisors, and principals, and nice group, a lot of fun. They seemed real responsive. And, you say, all right, we'll go back home now and see what happens. So the next day we went on a tour, and we went into one of the schools. And to go into this guy's classroom, this is secondary students with intellectual disabilities. And he's a teacher. His name is Mr. Kuhn, and he's teaching life skills. He was doing choral responding from the day before. We encouraged him just to give it a try. I had no idea we were going. If it was a setup, if it was a plan, it was fantastic. And what he was doing was currency. He was working with these learners to learn the names and the values of Korean paper money and coins. Not only that, then while we're watching, he has one of the students come up and get to be teacher and present the stuff. And so you'll have some instances like that. But my general experience is that general education teachers in particular just don't get access not only to these whole group responding techniques, but kind of the whole world of effective classroom management and the use of praise. They learn a lot of stuff. They know a lot of things. They come out, raring to go and work so hard, but not being able to produce the learning. Teachers are stressed and look for other jobs. And
for sure.
It's tough. That's another whole.
So I can certainly, I can identify with that. I think I might have told you my wife's a high school English teacher, and all our friends are teachers and things like that. So I'm very tied into the public school culture and milieu. And boy, do I hear about it from that cohort about the next thing, the current initiative or what have you. So and as such, I don't always succeed. And as evidenced by that story I told at the outset of our conversation, but I try to be sensitive to those competing contingencies.
Regardless of your title, if you are a behavior consultant who is working in or with schools and you are struggling and wondering why your interventions are not producing the desired results, you are not alone. Unfortunately, those tasked with improving behavior in schools are too often left to carry the burden by themselves. You are the behavior person, so you take care of it, is the unsaid mantra. But you can't improve behavior and the associated outcomes by yourself. In fact, creating sustainable improvement in student behavior almost always requires changes in the performance of the educators. I'm Dr. Pauly, and along with my colleagues Anika Costa and Matt Sikoria, we are designing coursework called the Behavioral Toolbox. In it, you will be taught strategies grounded in organizational behavior management for consulting in schools in a way that brings out the best in educators so they can bring out the best in the students they serve. If this sounds exciting, be sure to click on the link in the description to sign up for more information.
I want to just maybe circle back to the intervention itself. Well, there might be people in the audience who are like, man, this sounds awesome. And I can understand getting, choral responding or whole group responding going in some way, shape, or form, whether it's through response cards, vocal responses, thumbs up, thumbs down, etc. But what do you do for those, if kids continue to act out? What are some, guidelines and things like that people can, and maybe there's not one answer, but, I can imagine there might be some cases where you could do some, maybe just wait until they do something that's worthy of, that you can praise and get them moving forward that way. Or is it still the case where you would provide some sort of corrective response, or is it, walk us through how one might, coach a teacher,
Are we talking about, I guess, lessons in general, or you're starting to do something like choral responding and response cards?
Yes, in that context. Okay, so someone's like, I'm reading up. They read the Lambert
let's
study.
give it a shot.
Bunch of other things. They've talked to some other people, gotten a little coaching, and then they're ready to work with the teacher and said, look, I know you got a number of kids with disruptive classroom behavior. You can't do an FBA and behavior plan with 6 kids in and run 6 different interventions. Let's try something like
another way. Let's see if
and then the teacher's going to say, all right, great. That's great. That sounds awesome. But what do I do when Johnny, maybe draws the middle finger on the response card or maybe writes a choice word on the response
card?
Not
maybe. All of this.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. F you on the card. And so I would follow your lead, and that's what we would do. To the extent you are able to ignore it. Look for something any little bit of thing that you can, in a positive way, the student responds. Teachers, the older teachers are a little more hesitant, I've found, to want to try this, to try these strategies. Primary teachers, up through, elementary school and stuff. And then middle school and high school, there'll be teachers of saying, yeah, it's, my way to control it is to teach, is to present this stuff. They ought to listen and learn it. And then when, lesson goes off the rails, I scold, I reprimand, you leave it. But how's that been working? Right. Not so good. So it's that whole thing of let's try stuff. So to the extent that you can go in and model and coach, like with any strategy, would be the way to do it. And if we have, any podcast listeners about that, I've got some of the materials you could look at, Matt, to see if those would be useful. I am happy to report that the Council for Exceptional Children they've identified, they call them high leverage practices. And they published a couple books Routledge is the publisher. And one is called High Leverage Practices in Special Education. Oh, and what are those? Well, they define this as, something that you can get a lot of mileage out of and you ought to really consider using. One is increased student engagement. So I was asked to contribute a chapter. They have these couple of books, and Moira Conrad at OSU, who's been doing a lot of this work, good work, and stuff on guided notes and a whole lot of other stuff too. Moira would be a great podcast person for you. She's fabulous, and she's really into transition from high school into, adult life and so forth. Okay, so that was published a couple of years ago, and now they've already got a second edition called High Leverage Practices for Inclusive Classrooms. So the tier 3 intervention. So here's some things you ought to consider doing for all students. And so Moira and I have an article in there on that HLP of increasing engagement. a lot of examples in that chapter and applications to different subject matters, curriculum matter, I should say. So that's encouraging that some of that's kind of getting out. I've found that if you can get a group of teachers experiencing these strategies themselves, so I use choral responding and response cards in workshops and classes that I taught at OSU, and just made it fun as hell. And they could just, they're laughing and holding up the cards. This isn't so bad. Then there's some neat things you can do with indiscriminable reinforcement contingencies. That could have students write a number from whatever you want to go to at the top of your card. And let's say you're presenting, you're going to use some presentation technology, Keynote, PowerNote, you're on your Magic, your board. So you want to have that all set up so you can focus on your students, not have to think, what am I going to ask next? What's the next? Because that's dead time. In intertrial, delays is kind of the Bermuda Triangle of where lessons go to die and students start to mutiny. So there's a whole bunch of stuff on the importance of good pacing. But so now I'm in there and okay, I put number 14 on my card because that's Ernie Banks's number and that's going to work for me and so forth. So you present a question, cards up, you give feedback, cards down. There's some techniques for error correction during that response as well. And then with some of them, when you pop up say you're displaying the correct answer, what you were looking for, there might be a winning number or two there. Mm. And what do you get? You get a point, you get a little lottery ticket, you get whatever. Maybe one of your disruptive students gets to hand out the tickets and there's all this wealth of, knowledge and kind of peer-reviewed strategies for making classroom activities and lessons, not just more effective, but more effective. And I think fun's a big way to do it. So that's something to do. Anyway, I would do all that stuff with 40, 50-year-old teachers in there, and they're laughing, having fun. So, okay, I could give it a try, and and model it and practice. There is, I'll put this on the list too. There's a teacher we've worked with in North Carolina. His name's Taylor Gaddis, and I'll send you a link to his. He calls it the response card exchange, and it's one of these Padlet kind of things. And anybody can go on there and just see different examples of materials. You could upload your own, and it's organized under, I'm just looking here, math, social studies, language arts, science, miscellaneous. And then there's some things with related research. So one thing is, of course, make it all as easy as we can, and to go in and help teachers acquire and develop. If it's something like response cards or guided notes, and talked about that's a little more involved in terms of creating the necessary materials. But with choral responding, you can just, you can go in and, your students will let you know how you're doing.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Those are some helpful comments. Hey everyone, as a BCBA, meeting your continuing ed needs can be challenging at times. That's why I have made selected episodes of the Behavioral Observations podcast available for Type 2 continuing education credits. That's right. You can meet a portion of your professional development requirements on the go. Currently, we have CEs for topics including functional assessment, ethics, and supervision. Come learn from podcast favorites such as Greg Hanley, Pat Fryman, Mark Dixon, as well as many other amazing guests. For more information, head on over to behavioralobservations.com/get-CEs. So you alluded to the Bermuda Triangle, the intertrial interval, whatever you want to call it. And there's been some interesting studies. I think one of them we cited in our course, Hayden, Mansell, and Van Loan, where they looked at opportunities to respond as the independent variable. And so they had this one teacher that, radically increased their opportunities to respond from baseline. And they noted, and they measured success with one particular student who was nominated for behavioral intervention. And instead of doing an FBA, they just increase opportunities to respond.
Yeah. Yep.
And, as you might expect, problem behavior went down. On task, percent of time on task went up. Number of correct response went from, non-existent to, quite high, certainly relative to baseline and things like that. So, and one of the things I think was perhaps not clear in the study itself, it looked like they were using some type of response card or whole group responding strategy to get from a low to a high rate of opportunities to respond. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering if you can spend just a or however long you want to take talking about it. But I know this is kind of a variation or a way in which you can further enhance these types of strategies with as you described it, using pacing techniques. So could you elaborate on that and how one might go about thinking about whether that's a good idea, and if so, how might we go about doing that?
Oh, I think it's a good idea.
Okay, all right. So we got that. Check.
To move with good pacing. I'm trying to think. It was Horner, I believe. Was it Horner? No. The kind of the original pacing study in JABA was first graders, just 4 kids who toward the end of the year were really struggling learning to read. And the teacher, they had the teacher meet with them for, I don't know, let's call it a 15, 20 minute, small group lesson. And they used, then it was the DISTAR materials.
Oh, yeah.
System for, pre today's DI, but it's a similar thing. So the teachers, for example, presenting a letter or pair of letters, say, what sound? And the students responded correlate together. They all responded together. And then they called it slow and fast, basically. After providing the feedback for the response. So we've got let's call it a 3-term contingency, holding up the letter, what is the response, teacher gives feedback. With slow is 4 or 5 seconds, 3 4. I present the next one. And that kind of emulates a lot of instructions, much slower than that, actually. Fast was just go to the next one right now. And the graphs of that study are as eye-popping as the Lambert one. They show several things. They show participation, which is active student responding. OTRs, a bunch of related it's all in one, family of research. You were talking about it. Well, you like to call it opportunity to respond or active respond, but opportunity to respond is a measure of teacher behavior, providing those on. Sometimes that's what we want to look in terms of feedback, but ASR is student behavior as the outcome. That's so there's some differences there, and I've uploaded a couple things maybe that might be of interest to some podcasts. And I kind of see it as this bullseye target where we can think about time. How much time do we have available for instruction? And on the outer thing is available time. That's like the school calendar. School starts August, whatever, ends here. And then allocated time is how much the teacher has in my plan book put down. I'm going to do a 40-minute English lesson. Instruction time then is less than that because get in your seats, let's get started, all of that. Then there's time on task. There's that whole stuff mostly out of the UK years ago, but still very much relevant. But looking at the relationship between, most of that was correlational research, relationship between students spending time on materials that were judged to be at an instructional level and improved learning outcomes. Then you have academic learning times. There's kind of some citations that kind of narrows it. But then opportunity to respond, in my way of thinking about it, is the closest ring to the middle. And that's, then you can really look, it's a time or count-based measure of response opportunities. Okay. Typically measured by time sampling and counting. But ASR is a count-based measure by just count. It's the number of responses by the student. And that's what is most related to learning outcomes. But they're intertwined. Now, where are we going with this? Oh, the fast and slow. It's just a powerful, powerful demonstration and study. And then, there's a pretty solid body of research of various kinds of systematic replications and quite different ones of looking at pacing that tell us a couple things. And one for sure is you don't want to have that dead time between intertrial intervals.
Yeah, without question. Sometimes when I'm doing case consultation and I'm observing a classroom, that's something that really, once you understand that, the importance of that, you can't unsee it. It seems like
you can't unsee it. That's a good way to say it.
And a lot of times I'm in the classroom and there's such a lag time between opportunities to respond. That's a very apt description, Bill. There's times I'm like, oh my gosh, these kids are they're just sitting. Well, and sitting and they're listening. And it's and it can be rough. And so all the more reason for, to try to disseminate these practices out there. So I'll look up that pacing article, and that's a Horner paper, you said?
Yeah, shame on me if it's not Rob Horner, but I think it is.
Okay. We'll track
I'm gonna have it to you before.
All right, folks.
Shame on me right here. I've only cited it, most of my life and it in conference, but it's a good one for people to see that original demonstration. And it just was. So the kids not only responded more, and that was a measure of percentage of response opportunities that the kids responded. They took data on all four of the kids, but they also measured correct responses. So you got a kid who's responding, let's say, to 1 out of 4 opportunities because he's fooling around, she's fooling around or looking. And out of those 1 out of 4, getting 1 out of 4 correct. And I'm kind of hitting where the data were. Teacher goes to fast, and I'm responding to 90%, and I'm getting 80, 90%. So it's like a double. It's not just I'm engaged they have less off task and discern. That was the third measure, and that happened too. But geez, maybe I'm learning some stuff. I'm being successful, and that encourages more. So it's just really important, really important. So preparation. If I'm as simple as I'm going to do, about the only thing I'd trust myself to do, even choral responding, without having practice to have some prompts and a script, I could probably do odd and even numbers. Right? Just bang those out. There's something, and of course, teachers who are expert in their curriculum content can present a lot of important content. I'm not suggesting you're reading from a script when you do choral responding, but you've got a plan. And sometimes, let's say it's a lesson on discriminating. What is it? The equilateral scaling. What's the other one?
Isosceles.
Exactly. And so I've got on the board or on my screen a bunch of them up there, and of course they're different sizes and colors because that has nothing to do with it. And I've got a stick or a pointer, and I just, which one, and I can really, really move that way. So I'm prepared like that. I'm not turning my back on the students. I'm walking among the students. I'm not nailed down in the front of the room. That's really important too. I mentioned Fernando before. So I've been a couple times to this school where he's worked a long time. It's called the New Horizon, Hermosillo, Mexico. And I've never seen such magnificent teachers from preschool to advanced AP level math and science in that school. Every one of them is just a fabulous teacher. And they all are like models of using these whole group response techniques, especially choral responding, very, very effectively.
I believe you shared some of the video footage from one of those classrooms with me.
Yeah, maybe. Well. Yeah, I hope so. It's really
that certainly was very cool to see. Put into action.
And they've got classes of 40, 45 high school students who by then know a heck of a lot because those that have been that stayed in the school have made millions of responses.
Yeah. And that, and it makes sense that they would have higher levels of achievement just, from what we understand from the, precision teaching literature in terms of just more responses and per unit of time gives you a better shot at fluency. Certainly. It's a very glib description of it, but, so I appreciate you walking through these examples. Bill, I was going to close with, asking for some, what other pieces of advice you might have for a listener who's, hearing this and maybe hearing for the first time, or maybe, knowing enough to be dangerous or whatever, and wants to help fellow teachers, or just, maybe they consult the schools or they're school-based BCBAs and they want to help their friends and colleagues, be more successful using these sorts of techniques. You've dispensed a lot of advice already, so I'm not sure what other thoughts you might have, but I'll give you the opportunity to share anything on this subject that we didn't touch on thus far that you think might be helpful for the listener. And if not, we can certainly just, put a pin in it for here and come back at this at a different point in time.
Well, let's not call this advice. I'm tired of hearing myself.
All right. Fair enough.
But maybe end with this as potential, like, wow, I never thought of it that way. That may be a bit of some motivation to explore and go. So you mentioned, you asked about with the Lambert dissertation study, kind of was that going in? Let's give this, see if this can fly or whatever. And what we did primarily, there was a couple studies that preceded it. And the first one really said, the first couple of studies were undergraduate honors theses and student projects, grad students and teachers to be would be doing these strategies. But so Janani Narayan, this was 90, I think published in 90 in JABA. And she worked with a fourth grade, this was a Columbus inner city school, general ed classroom. And she, for her master's thesis, that evaluated response cards. But the teacher was a teacher the whole time. And it was daily social studies lessons, facts, not factual knowledge about. In fact, I can remember one of they were somehow in New England. I remember one of the lessons, and an answer might be what's a product in Massachusetts and lobster or what?
Cranberries,
birds, stuff. But it was in the state, it's in the textbooks, in the curriculum. It's what they're supposed to learn. So we can always question whether, what we're using these strategies for. Is it relevant? Is it functional? Put that aside. So during these lessons, it was done each day. The students answered 30 more questions. This is ASR. They're responding. 30 more in a 20-minute lesson with response cards compared to when she called a baseline condition was calling on individual students to answer, but didn't even just do in that. I remember a randomized list to not leave it up to. So that was teacher. Everybody got called on, but there's, 20 kids in the class or something. At best, you're not going to get. Okay. All right. Now extend that daily increase in active student engagement from using response cards for just 20 minutes a day, just no more than that. The typical school year in the U.S. is 180. That would give each student more than 5,000 additional responses. Now, imagine teachers incorporating corresponding or response cards in multiple lessons across the school day. I'm not pitching you do this 6.5 hours. That's not at all, but you got some thoughts. Students would make tens of thousands of more responses per school year. Now, let's ask ourselves, how much more might students learn if they left high school after making 1 million or more responses to the curriculum throughout K-12? Now, you can have poorly designed instruction, and you can have kids respond all they want, and it's not going to be great. So that's got to be a a foundation in there. But boy, if you have a good lesson, good examples, good curriculum, give your students a way to get engaged with it and involved. 1 million responses. I probably could have learned at least some of the bunch of the stuff I didn't learn.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway,
same
maybe
here.
that's
Same here.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's an inspiring thought to leave us with. Bill, I know you and Jill have a website. Where can people go to learn more about what you guys are doing vis-a-vis the book and places you're speaking at and things like that? Oop, I just lost your audio there. You're muted, Bill.
Yeah.
Where can people people go to find out more about you, your book, where you and Jill will be speaking, what far-flung part of the globe you guys are jetting off to disseminate this good work?
We have a website called Contracting with Kids, and it's just contractingwithkids.com. And a neat thing is you click there and you can get these contracting forms in, at this time, about a dozen different languages. You don't need the book. They're free. Anybody can access them. If interested, there's a page showing the translations that have been published and are in the works. And then there's a section called Authors, and we list videos, podcasts. Looks like we did one for behavioral observations.
Hey!
And then we're about to add some stuff to it. If you scroll down, there is a speaking and appearance schedule there with links too. I will just say, since you mentioned the world, I'm excited to, next month I'm going to be in Manaus, Brazil, which is the middle of Amazonia. And there's an ABA conference there. And it's going to be real exciting because the book is in Portuguese, and we're going to do a couple presentations. One will be, based on the book, and people will get the Portuguese translation there. So
that's
really
very exciting.
Yeah. Maybe get some fishing in. I don't know.
Take lots of pictures.
Yeah, we'll do.
All right, Bill. Thanks so much for joining us again.
Okay, Matt. Take care. We'll see you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.